Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cathy Reisenwitz Show. I am Cathy Reisenwitz, and I have with me today the amazing, the beautiful, the intelligent Tiffany Madison. She is a Ron Paul channel contributor. She's a former Washington Times columnist. She's a program manager at Liberty.me. She was a crisis counselor, and she's worked for veterans care nonprofits. Her husband is an active duty member of the military who's been deployed multiple times. She specializes in, with her tremendous talents, foreign policy and issues of civil liberties, such as domestic spying. Tiffany, how are you today? Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. That was quite a generous introduction. I appreciate that.
Of course. So actually, before I begin, what's the latest at Liberty.me? How's that going? Are you enjoying being on the team?
Phenomenal. In fact, I'm a little tired just because we've been working about 16, 18-hour days to make it happen. It's going very well. Yesterday we had Miss Julie Borowski on, and she did a phenomenal series on helping people conquer social media, especially as activists. And we've got a bunch of people coming up this week too, so keeping us very busy, and all the new members that we're welcoming, super exciting. So we're hoping a lot of them will contribute and be writers, not only on their own publishing sites, but for the site as well. So we have quite a few projects that we're working on. It's definitely going very well.
Startup life. That's awesome. I really want this project to succeed. I'm huge. Everyone knows I'm a huge Jeffrey Tucker fangirl, and obviously we need more liberty-oriented and positive places for libertarians to hang out and have constructive dialogue instead of just fighting each other all the time. So I'm very excited about Liberty.me, and with people like you on the team, it cannot fail. So to go right into the news, the Supreme Court said to law enforcement, if you want to search somebody's cell phone, come back with a warrant. How do you feel about that?
Huge. I know a lot of people probably on this network don't appreciate the Constitution and are of the Lysander Spooner school of thought, which I totally appreciate and value. But it is nice to have what's left of our Supreme Court's even remote adherence to the Constitution or any other court, at least attempting to help people take back their civil liberties. I have very little faith that they will continue to do that, especially as future events unfold, but it is nice to see some pushback. A major thing to me that was very huge about that is if you read the actual cases that led up to these decisions, essentially what they were saying is that your phone is like a diary. And if you're a suspect or if you're arrested under any reason at all, they can just take your phone because it's like your diary. And they would do that with any other suspect. The actual federal government's argument was just that your phone on you is searchable by any measure and for any reason. So having them come back and actually appreciate that the digital age is very different from, you know, technology in the 20th century and even the 18th century is actually refreshing. Whether or not the federal government or any other institution, you know, from the police all the way up to, you know, specific court cases that are making their way up through the judicial system right now, will continue to, you know, value privacy is an entirely other issue. And I hope they do, but again, my faith has been a pretty shaken this last decade. So positive development, but stay vigilant in terms of protecting privacy.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of anything that would be more revealing about me as a person than my cell phone, and specifically the you know, files and the information that you can find through my cell phone about me. I mean, walking through my apartment reveals a tiny little bit of who I am compared to my cell phone. So I think this is a really great thing. I think you bring up an interesting point as well, because it's kind of interesting for, like, you know me, I'm an anarchist, and but I'm still going to appeal to the Constitution, because even if I think it's you know, obviously wholly insufficient, it is the only safeguard that we have in the system that we're in. Is it a good enough one? Of course not. But if we're going to say we're operating under it, then we need to appeal to it. And so I think you make a really good point. I wanted to go into the situation in Iraq. I think that you've got a really interesting perspective on it as someone who's closer to it than most. Can you give us kind of a summary of what's happening?
Sure. Well, it's very complicated, obviously, and I'm sure if you listen to the news, you almost have to listen to 10 or 12 different pundits to even get a remotely coherent or factual summary. But essentially, a patchwork of insurgents. For those who are familiar with, you know, Middle Eastern foreign policy, ISIS or ISIL which is a mostly Sunni insurgency, is sweeping through Iraqi cities that our soldiers and coalition soldiers fought and were wounded and sacrificed and traded their souls and bodies and futures to protect, are now falling to these insurgents. And our media keeps calling them terrorists, but really, they're more like, again, a militia insurgency. They are using terroristic tactics, but they are literally going in and seizing cities. So some of our politicians have called for airstrikes, most notably Rand Paul, who I completely and wholly disagree with. I don't think that applying the same solutions that we tried last time and failed are going to work this time either. They've captured Mosul, which is a place, again, where American and Iraqis fought and died in the thousands. And this typical brutality that they're using as they head toward Baghdad, I mean, they're murdering in mass, they're installing fear into the Iraqi population. Again, they're headed to Baghdad. So, of course, the neocons want troops and drones. They take no responsibility for their warmongering and their horrific, foreign policy that brought on this disaster. And what they're trying to do, essentially, is make an argument that we have to intervene once again. I disagree, and I'm sure most of the people in your audience would disagree. Them failing to acknowledge their arrogance and their, horrible ideas to remake the Middle East and safe for democracy is a throwback from Western colonial days. It's just called something different. Saddam was a monster, like Stalin, and he used brutal tactics to maintain unification of these various factions that didn't want to be unified. And instead of deposing him and creating the three-state solution, we tried and failed to install yet another puppet government. So really what we need to do is take a step back, try to get ahead of the conflict if we can. But involving ourselves in this sectarian violence, especially at this stage, to me is completely and wholly flawed. Our armchair generals and fellow conservatives that want to advocate from the safety of their living room that, SEAL Team 6 to the rescue over and over and over again, they probably haven't asked a veteran whether they want to return to that, excuse my French, shithole and do whatever they can to save what's left of nothing. I mean, there's really nothing but our embassies to protect. And honestly, after all we've done to that country, do we really deserve an embassy? I don't think so. So, the neocons essentially never wanted us to leave. They want us to stay there for 50 years. That was pretty much their intention. To them, troops are statistics on a ledger, bullets, bombs, trillions of infrastructure wasted are profits and power to them. So these wars have always been about resources. They've always been about territory. They want a perpetual occupation like Japan and Germany, and their plan is failing. So Iraqis on the ground that want to be free from the Shiite government and, like the Syrian rebels, are joining with ISIS, they don't believe in an Islamic caliphate. I mean, they're fighting to undo Western agreements after the First World War, the British and French borders imposed upon them. Expand as far as they can, absorb as many resources, and the Iraqis are going to have to stand up and fight for themselves. They're going to have to stand in Baghdad, where the Shia militia groups are fierce people that do not want to be ruled or even told what to do by ISIS. They're going to have to stand up and fight. And hopefully, out of this, unfortunately, there's going to be some very sad times for the people of Iraq. But America intervening yet again and attempting to impose our flawed tactics yet again. First of all, we're in debt. Second of all, the American people do not have the stomach for it. And our troops are sick and tired of dying and sending their friends there for the people who refuse to stand up for themselves. So the Kurds have created their own country naturally. They've created an enclave in the north. They have pretty much enlarged it. They've taken Kirkuk, which was a huge, huge issue in the three-state solution because it's an oil-rich city. So now really what we have to do is take a step back and try to embolden perhaps our allies in the Middle East who do not want to see an Islamic caliphate because it threatens their control of the region, to step up and thwart this, essentially a very dangerous ideology spreading into the throes and power of government.
That's a really, really detailed and helpful analysis, and I appreciate that very much. I'm really impressed by the familiarity you have with the situation. But something that you said kind of piqued my interest because you said that the actions in Iraq are a holdover from colonialism, or a modern implementation of colonialist ideas. But honestly, it seems to me that it's kind of an insult to colonialism, because as bad as it was and is going forward, at least the way colonialism used to be done, it was very clear that the end result was supposed to be, treasure and workers, and was supposed to enrich the colonialist country. We don't even have that. Like, we are far, far, far poorer for every engagement that we have overseas. So, I mean, it's really and truly the worst of all worlds. The countries that we've invaded are no better off. We're no better off. Everyone is losing. And I feel like part of that is because, for better or worse, for worse, really, the rules of engagement with colonialism were, the invading country does what it wants and leaves when it's done. And this whole humanitarian aspect to modern colonialism puts a nice face on it, but it's again, the countries are no better off for having been violently invaded and war-torn, and the invading countries are no better off. So I feel like you've probably got some, again, unique insight into, it's an impossible task. Democratizing a country that's not interested in democracy, not ready for democracy, is an impossible task. But then the military, the U.S. government, the U.S. military is trying to accomplish it under impossible terms, where they're dealing with insurgents, terrorists, whatever you want to call it. It's not a normal war where the normal rules can apply. So it seems like whatever troop engagement that we have going forward is going to be doomed to fail for similar reasons. So I want to ask you about that. And then I wanted to ask you about Rand Paul is calling for airstrikes. And this is something that, honestly, I kind of foresaw, because I remember him talking, I forgot which speech it was, but it was like 2 years ago, about the existential threat that radical Islam poses. And I've been saying for a long time, Rand Paul is less of a warmonger than your average Republican. He's not Dick Cheney for sure, but he's also not his daddy. He does not seem to have fully internalized the concept of blowback, and he doesn't seem to have faith in the idea that if we stop terrorizing other countries, it's going to be a net positive for our safety. What happened there? What's going on with Rand Paul, and how is this going to impact the view of him among the GOP electorate?
Well, to your first question and your statement about colonialism, it's funny because the way that the British did it, if you study post-World War or World War I history, is they went in and they found a minority faction, and they emboldened that minority faction. They made that minority faction and rule over the other, 70 or 60% of the population. So those actual factions that they empowered and gave, puppet rules in government would fight against the majority and use, brutal tactics in order to keep their position in power, not because they were defending American interests, but because they were defending their own. The Americans have never taken that tactic, not saying it's correct because it's not, and I'm a non-interventionist and we shouldn't do it anyway, but if you're comparing all of these tactics, what the Americans have done, and Western powers in general, is they stopped being honest about it being wars for territory and resources, and they had to do that in the 20th century. Now it's become even worse because we are no longer pretending at all that these are wars about resources. We are using safe for democracy and all these softball, pretty little terms that make the local population furious because they realize the futility and the nonsense that we're actually spewing on a foreign policy level. But it allows the American people to take I guess you would say, an equal softball approach to war. So instead of actually saying, yeah, we're going to go in and take over this oil or capture this critical piece of the Middle East to protect Israel and to protect all these resources, and we want to rebuild the Middle East in the modern democratic image, we're using the war on terror. We have to do this, and if we don't, they're going to come and attack us, even though there's no evidence or logic of it. So we have to learn from those past mistakes, and we're not. And if we don't learn from those mistakes, I cannot even imagine how horrific the rest of this century is going to be for humanity. So it's really up to the people who are, especially the veterans that are pissed and that don't want to go to another pointless war, to the civilians that profess to support the troops, to fight against this continued colonialism light, essentially. And it's up to the average, this burgeoning liberty movement and the average American to say, I'm not going to be fooled this time again. So, that's really kind of the only way that we can thwart or do our best to thwart colonialism in this new modern era. In terms of Rand Paul, I'm very disappointed. Strategically and politically, I understand why he's saying these things. Rand Paul is in an unfortunate and unique position where he has to balance a very powerful war lobby and a very, very powerful neocon wing in his libertarian or libertarian light or pro-liberty conservative factions that would essentially vote for him. So he's thinking of election. This will not make anyone feel better, but I can understand why a politician like that would say such a thing. That doesn't excuse it. I think it's ignorant. I think it's stupid. I don't think that I don't think he should propose any solutions that involve our military, either special forces or especially not ground troops on the ground, or ground troops or even air support. So I think it's misguided, but I understand why he's doing it. If you are in that position such as he, you've got really the GOP divided into 3 separate factions. And so you've got, again, the social conservatives, the neocons, and then the burgeoning liberty wing. If you say, I don't want anything to do with this foreign conflict, the media will crucify you as just like your father. And Dr. Ron Paul, who's a hero of mine, he did not make a lot of headway because he didn't play the game. So as much as people don't like it, Rand Paul is playing the game. If he continues down that path, though, he will lose the support of the majority of his base that he needs in order to get elected, including me. So hopefully this will taper down, and just as things continue to develop, he will pull back from any of this war talk, because we're not liking it.
Yeah, and I wonder how much he risks alienating the anti-war youth. I think President Barack Obama got unprecedented amount of youth support, in large part because of his very clear anti-spying, pro-transparency rhetoric. Obviously, it's turned out to all be rhetoric, but that's what he campaigned on, and that's what was exciting the youth. I think, again, Rand Paul's actual moves, his actual work in the anti-spying, pro-civil liberties realm has really energized the youth. But I think, like you said, people are getting really weary of war. And so if Rand Paul can be the only candidate, in all likelihood, I mean, if he runs against Hillary Clinton, he will be the anti-war candidate. Hillary Clinton is not anywhere near consistently pro-peace. It's hard to say. I mean, the baby boomers are a huge, huge voting bloc. They tend to be, I think, a little more pro-war, a little less war-weary. I think, I don't know, you've probably studied it more. How important do you think that the pro-peace voting contingent is, and would it be a wash for him to be, maybe not to his father's degree, anti-war, but I mean, at least to where, the young people who voted for Barack Obama are really weary of entangling ourselves in these, I wouldn't even say colonialism light, I would say colonialism stupid entanglements.
I think he has a very careful line to toe, and I say that because, again, you're balancing those factions. When it comes to the youth, it's very hard to find a pro-war youth. Most of us, especially if we're paying enough attention to politics enough to vote, and I'm not talking about the Barack Obama supporters, but I mean, the youth that have been enlivened and invigorated by the concept of liberty and have spent since 2008 and the 2012 election reading anti-war screeds from libertarian thinkers. I mean, there's a huge growing faction of people out there who he has to woo. And if you're going to kind of tout these tired old neocon answers to solutions, even though he's not a neocon by definition, people falsely say that all day long. If you look up the definition, Jack Hunter did a great, wonderful thing for the American conservative called "What is a Neoconservative?" So if you're going to call him a neocon, at least know what that is. It's an actual specific ideology that was crafted by the Crystals and all these, very horrible intellectuals from the left that kind of soaked into conservatism. But if he's going to propose these neocon solutions in order to not threaten or frighten the war lobby, that to me is not a correct approach. Not calling for airstrikes is to me the solution, because he should say, we don't actually know what's going to happen here. We should take a step back and actually maybe try to work with our allies. a diplomatic solution as opposed to even supposing airstrikes is the solution, in my opinion. I mean, what do those airstrikes actually mean? So, you know, does that mean my husband flies helicopters and all of his friends that I'm around all the time, they fly helicopters? Does that mean that they're going to send him over to conduct airstrikes again in Iraq for the second time? I mean, that's really not where they want to go. They're tired. They've been at war for 10 years. So really, it's proposing these tired solutions when the will is not behind you, not only amongst most veterans who, you know, again, sacrificed a lot under false pretenses and have had the last decade to realize that their will is not there. So he is choosing an unpopular route to satiate the goal and the will of the powerful lobbies in that sense, and that really, really dings his credibility and his trustworthiness as a candidate. And I know people say, well, it's Washington, it's politics, but our generation is extremely, you know, ideological. We want some purity in a candidate. That's why he's been successful. That's why Justin Amash and Thomas Massey and all these really pro-liberty candidates have even been able to gain grassroots support. I mean, Justin Amash alone, I donated hundreds of dollars to him because I believe in what he's doing. I don't even live in Michigan. I'm a Texan living in Tennessee. But that right there shows that our generation will support people who stand up for our ideals. And if Rand Paul is going to go the opposite way, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to defeat someone like Hillary, who's going to bring a ton of money and an entire throngs of feminist women, no offense, because I know you're an individualist, but they're going to have, you know, the huge, if you don't vote for her, you're a sexist, the same way that they use the race card with Barack Obama. You're going to have that faction and tons of money, endless money. So, you know, he's really, excuse my French, he's got to get his shit straight. And if he doesn't, I don't see any potential for him to actually gain ground after, you know, debates. It's a tough position, but he's got to stick to his ideology.
And that's all he has going for him. I mean, let's be honest. Rand Paul can play the game a little better than his daddy, but not much. You know, this idea that I'm going to be a slick politician and not say things according to my conscience or any kind of principle because I'm going to be smooth is just not something that's going to work for Rand Paul. He's not there yet. Smoothness is not his forte. I mean, it really needs to be principle. That's what he has going for him. He needs to play to his strengths. I
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And again, I would love to see him, you know, take a step back. He's done phenomenal things for privacy. I mean, again, I know you recall, and I'm sure anybody who's doing this that's remotely involved in politics remembers the, you know, fervor when he stood up and filibustered over drones. I mean, that was invigorating. I have people that know me as a libertarian that I've been preaching liberty to at various social functions, from dinner parties to birthdays, you know, for years, tweet me or call me or text me and say, hey, like, who's this Rand Paul guy? Is that Ron Paul dude that you were talking about? And that opened the door for a ton of people to listen to liberty discussion and actually say, hey, you should be aware this is actually an Eric Holder statement, an evasive answer that came out of his mouth. That should threaten you. That should make you worry. And of course, Rand Paul bungled by making the robbery at a liquor store analogy. But standing up there and that filibuster was huge for liberty. And he cannot lose those gains and the awareness that he's cultivated and the following that he's been able to garner by proposing failed, idiotic, you know, continued almost Wilsonian policies.
He won my devotion when he was ranting about the incandescent light bulb ban, and that rant went into low-flow toilets, and it was clear that he was just, you know, an American man pissed off at an overreaching government. There was nothing smooth or polished or well thought out about that whole thing. It was just like, this guy gets it, you know, he's on it about what the heck is wrong with our government. So, yeah, I mean, when he just kind of gets up and says what he thinks in a principled, understandable, small government manner, that's when Rand Paul is winning. And when he's trying to play politics, not so much. I really, you know, I understand that you've got to play the game to an extent, but yeah. Well, and luckily, too, his opponent, his likely opponent, Hillary Clinton, she's not particularly good at the game either. She's already had some pretty huge gaffes, you know, already throughout her history. You know, and it stinks because I don't know how you live with Bill Clinton for, you know, 50 plus years and you don't learn a thing or two about how to glad handle and how to spin and how to, cause he's a master, but she's not. So I mean, at least Rand Paul's got that going for him. But I do think, again, he can be the anti-Hillary in that she's got no principle. She's got no folksy every woman appeal to her, and he's got that. And I think he's got to use it. So in the few minutes that we've got left, I want to, first of all, thank you so much again for coming on. And when am I going to get to read you again, and where? Where should people follow your work, Tiffany?
You know, honestly, since I've taken this program manager position, it's been managing one project, awesome, ambitious project after another. So it's been a little crazy. We've had events and conferences and 6 or 7 different programs that have kind of launched with a team of, you know, a couple dozen people. So it's been a little crazy to find time to write, but I hopefully will contribute again to the Ron Paul channel. Policy Mike is also hopefully in my long-term plan, and the Libertarian Republic. I've actually, it's really hard to find social places to comment on social commentary. I enjoy rustling all the jimmies with my anti all the things statements and my rather blunt and antagonistic approach, which sometimes doesn't find a home at Washington Times or at the Ron Paul channel. So the Libertarian Republic has kind of become my home for that. So I'm looking actually in the next month to pick up writing again once everything kind of smooths over and we're moving full steam ahead.
Very good. And you've got a show on Liberty Me, right? Are you still doing an interview show?
Yes, actually today I will be interviewing a turned medical, I think was a professor and is now a medical student who is a former Iraq War veteran who has an incredibly uncanny and fantastic insight on this entire debacle. So I'll be interviewing him today. And then I will also be working with the 10th Amendment Center, Michael Meharry. He is the kind of director and has some amazing perspectives on, because I'm pro-secession and I'm pro-nullification. So he has some amazing insights on the nullification movement, all the successes of the last 10 years, and what the future of the 10th Amendment Center holds. So those are my 2 interviews for the week, but it's called The Charm Offensive. Wonder why? and it's on the Liberty Me YouTube channel.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you again, Tiffany, for coming on. Thank you guys so much for watching. Catch this podcast. It is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 30 minutes. It's on my YouTube channel. Please like, comment, subscribe.